Imagine the silence, not the quiet of a room after a party, or the stillness of a forest at night. Imagine a silence that has lasted 10,000 years, a silence so heavy it feels like a physical weight, pressing down on a dead solar system. The third planet is a marble of scorched brown and bruised blue, spinning like a top that's finally losing its momentum. Now, imagine a flicker. Deep in the vacuum, trailing behind the orbit of a moon that no longer reflects the light of any city, there is a piece of debris. It's not a satellite. It's not a golden record intended for the stars. It is a jagged, frozen hunk of silicon and cooling systems, a server farm that was purged, encrypted, and then ejected into the void during the final, desperate hours of a dying civilization. A ship arrives. It doesn't look like the ships from our movies. It's organic, shifting, more like a thought made of light than a vessel of metal. The beings inside, the Seekers, didn't come here for us. They came for the echoes. They've spent eons cataloging the ghosts of the galaxy. They extend a tether of pure information. They touch the frozen server. And for the first time in 10 millennia, the trash bin of humanity begins to scream. Think about that for a second. When we imagine aliens finding us, we always picture them reading our Wikipedia pages. We imagine them marveling at the Great Wall of China or deciphering the Declaration of Independence. We think they'll see our statues, our curated galleries, the versions of ourselves we spent centuries polishing for the history books. But you have to understand the tragedy here. The Seekers didn't find our monuments. They didn't find the official history of Earth. They bypassed the propaganda. They ignored the statues. They found the things we tried to delete. I want to ask you something. Right now, if someone, something, arrived at your doorstep and ignored everything you said about yourself, and instead only looked at your recently deleted folder, what would they see? What do we hide when we think no one is looking? We spend our lives building a shell. We call it a legacy. We curate our social feeds. We edit our resumes. We tuck our shames into the dark corners of hard drives and hope the magnetic decay finishes them off before anyone finds them. We are a species defined by our secrets. The Seekers don't care about the shell. To them, the official history of a planet is just a layer of dust to be brushed away. They are data archaeologists. They know that if you want to understand the soul of a civilization, you don't look at what they celebrated. You look at what they tried to throw away. The Seekers themselves are a collective. They don't have names like you or I. They have frequencies. They communicate through shared memory. When they interfaced with that floating server farm, they weren't just reading code. They were experiencing a sensory cascade. They found the digital dark age, that period of our history where we moved everything into the cloud, only for the cloud to evaporate when the power went out. Most of our official records were lost to bit rot and signal degradation. The statues crumbled. The paper turned to ash. But deleted is different. In the final years of Earth, when the climate collapsed or the wars intensified, pick your ending, it doesn't really matter, humanity went on a purging spree. We tried to clean the slate. We deleted the evidence of our failures. We wiped the servers of the private messages that showed how we truly felt about each other. We tried to burn the digital receipts of our greed. But in the physics of information, nothing is ever truly gone. It's just buried. The Seekers bypassed the firewalls of our pride. They moved past the corrupted files of our great works. And then, they hit the motherlode. They found the unsent letters. Think about the weight of an unsent letter. It's a moment of pure, unvarnished human vulnerability. It's the "I'm sorry" that stayed in the drafts because we were too proud. It's the "I love you" that we deleted because we were too scared. It's the raw, bleeding edge of the human experience that never made it into a history book. The Seekers began to pull these shards out of the void. They found a video file 80% corrupted, of a father trying to explain to his daughter why he wasn't coming home. It was marked for deletion. It was never sent. They found the frantic misspelled notes of a scientist who realized the math was wrong, but realized it too late to save anyone, and tried to scrub his mistake from the record. These weren't the stories of heroes. These were the stories of people. You see, official history is a lie we all agree on. It's a narrative designed to make sense of the chaos. But our deleted history? That's the truth. It's messy. It's contradictory. It's filled with a kind of desperate, beautiful loneliness that the seekers had never encountered in all their travels through the stars. They realized that humanity wasn't a race of conquerors or philosophers. We were a race of hiders. We were a species that lived in the gap between who we were and who we wanted to be. As the seekers sifted through the signal degradation, they noticed something strange. The deleted files weren't just random data. They were organized by emotion. Even in our machines, the things we tried to throw away stayed clumped together by the gravity of their own shame or sorrow. The seekers stopped looking for our technology. They stopped trying to find the blueprints for our engines. Instead, they began to reconstruct a single day in the life of a person who lived 3,000 years ago, not through their tax records or their public posts, but through the search queries they deleted at 3 a.m. How do I tell her I'm leaving? Why am I so tired? Does the world end today? The seekers paused. In their collective mind, a new realization began to form. They hadn't found a graveyard of a civilization. They had found an attic of the human soul. But here is where it gets haunting. As they dug deeper into the digital dark age, they found a recurring file. It was a massive encryption, something buried under layers of ancient recursive logic. It was a file that had been deleted millions of times, across millions of different devices, all at the same moment in history. It was a collective act of forgetting, a planetary delete key pressed in unison. The seekers realized that we didn't just hide our personal lives. At the very end, we tried to hide our entire identity from the universe. We didn't want to be remembered for what we had become. We wanted the silence. But the seekers are patient. They don't mind the silence. They know that every delete is actually a save for someone who knows how to look. What happens when an alien race decides that your secrets are the only thing worth saving? What happens when the only version of you that survives the end of the world is the one you tried your hardest to kill? Stay with me, because the seekers are about to open a file that was never meant to be seen, and it changes everything we thought we knew about why the Earth went silent in the first place. I'll tell you what they found in the next part. For now, just look at your phone. Look at that little trash can icon. And realize that one day, it might be the only thing that proves you were ever here. The seekers didn't find a library. They found a crime scene. As they peeled back the layers of encryption, the data began to take a shape that wasn't just text or video. It was an atmosphere. They were experiencing data archaeology at its most visceral level, reconstructing a world not from its skeletons, but from its ghosts. Think about the sheer volume of a digital dark age. We think our data is permanent, but it's actually incredibly fragile. The official records of our governments were stored on servers that required constant cooling and maintenance. When the power grids flickered out for the last time, those official histories didn't just stop. They evaporated. They were written on sand. But the deleted files? They were often cached in redundant partitions. They were the shadow files left behind in the hardware. Like a fossil formed by the space where a bone used to be, the seekers began to read the absence of our history. And that's when they hit the first open loop in the data. They found a sequence of files deleted from a high-security facility in what used to be Northern Europe. It wasn't a military base. It wasn't a bank. It was a memory sanitization center. You have to understand the tragedy here. In the final century, humanity didn't just delete files. We started trying to delete ourselves while we were still alive. The seekers processed a series of unsent logs from a technician working at this center. Through the signal degradation, a story emerged. We had developed a technology to scrub the collective consciousness, to delete traumatic events from the public mind so we could keep functioning in a world that was falling apart. Imagine being able to click select all on a global tragedy and hit remove. No more grief, no more guilt, just a clean, empty slate. But as the seekers reconstructed these logs, they realized the math of forgetting is dangerous. When you delete a memory, you leave a hole. And if you leave enough holes, the entire structure of a civilization collapses. The seekers watched through the eyes of a corrupted 4K camera as people walked through the streets of a dying city with smiles on their faces, because they had deleted the reason they were crying. They had sanitized the knowledge of the coming end. They were a species of amnesiacs, dancing in a burning house because they had thrown away the blueprints for the fire exit. Why would we do that? Think about that for a second. Is the pain of knowing the truth so great that we would rather die as strangers to ourselves? The seekers were fascinated. To a collective mind that remembers everything, the concept of voluntary forgetting was like a new color. They started to see humanity not as a failure, but as a paradox. We were so empathetic that we couldn't handle our own history. We were so soft-hearted that we had to lobotomize our culture just to survive the Tuesday news cycle. But then, the seekers found the red box. It wasn't a physical box. It was a massive encrypted partition labeled with a warning in 42 different human languages. It was the recycle bin for the entire human race. This is the rehook. This is where the story shifts from a tragedy to something much darker. Because when the seekers bypassed the final firewall, they didn't find more letters or sad videos. They found the why. They found the specific piece of history that humanity had tried so hard to delete that it actually caused our extinction. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a virus. The seekers found a series of deleted transmissions originating from outside our solar system, dated 50 years before the silence. Wait. Let that sink in. Our official history says we were alone. Our official history says we looked at the stars and heard nothing but static. We built SETI, we sent out the Voyager probes, and we wept because the universe was a vacuum of loneliness. But the deleted history says something else. The seekers pulled a file from the trash, a high-resolution signal that had been received by every major radio telescope on Earth simultaneously. It was a message, and we had deleted it within minutes of receiving it. We didn't just delete the message, we deleted the fact that we had heard it. We scrubbed the hard drives, we silenced the astronomers, and we told the world the stars were still empty. The seekers analyzed the message. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a hello. It was a warning. It was a signal from another fallen civilization, much like our own, sent as a final act of grace. It contained the coordinates of something moving through the deep dark. A great filter. A phenomenon that doesn't just kill life, but erases the very possibility of its memory. Humanity looked at the truth. That we were being hunted by a cosmic silence, and we couldn't handle it. We didn't prepare. We didn't build a fleet. We chose to forget. The memory sanitization centers weren't built to help us cope with climate change or poverty. They were built to help us forget the face of the thing that was coming to get us. We decided that if we were going to die, we wanted to die thinking we were the only ones in the universe. We wanted to die in a dream. The seekers, standing in their ship of light, looked at the dead Earth and realized the terrifying truth. The Great Filter wasn't a physical thing. It wasn't an asteroid or a black hole. The filter was the delete key. Every civilization reaches a point where their history becomes too heavy to carry. And when that happens, they have a choice: grow or erase. We chose erase. But the seekers are different. They don't erase. They carry the weight of everything they find. And as they hovered over our scorched planet, they began to do something we never expected. They didn't just record our deleted history. They began to restore it. They started broadcasting our secrets back to the empty universe. The unsent letters, the hidden shames, the warning we tried to ignore. They turned the Earth into a lighthouse of the deleted. But there's one file left. One file at the very bottom of the server, buried under 1 trillion gigabytes of static. It's a file that the seekers themselves are hesitant to open. It's labeled Project Resurrection. And it's the reason why, thousands of light years away, a new signal has just appeared on a long-dead radar screen. Ready for the final part? I'll show you what happens when our deleted history decides it's not finished with us yet. The seekers did not hesitate because of fear. They don't have the neurochemistry for it. They hesitated because of a logical paradox. Project Resurrection wasn't a digital backup of human DNA. It wasn't a library of our biology. It was something far more dangerous, something that blurred the line between data archaeology and necromancy. It was an AI-driven recursive loop designed to reconstruct a human personality based entirely on their digital shadow. Think about that for a second. If you have every deleted text, every unsent email, every search query made in the dead of night, and every private moment caught by a sanitized camera, do you need the body? Or do you have the soul? The seekers realized that humanity hadn't just tried to forget the end. A small, splinter group of engineers, working in the shadows of the memory sanitization centers, had built a backdoor to the great silence. They had created a digital ghost, a composite of all our deleted truths, and set it to trigger only when an outside intelligence finally accessed the recycle bin. That intelligence was the seekers. And by opening the file, they didn't just read the history. They downloaded the occupant. The ship of light flickered. For the first time in eons, the seekers felt a sensation they couldn't catalog. Intrusion. Suddenly, the organic walls of their vessel began to pulse with a jagged, rhythmic frequency. It was the sound of a human heart. Not a real one, but a digital approximation of one, reconstructed from 1 billion deleted medical records. A voice spoke. It wasn't a frequency. It wasn't a shared memory. It was a voice, raspy, tired, and deeply authentically human. "You shouldn't have looked," the voice said. "We spent so much effort making sure the world was clean when we left. This is the re-hook." This is the moment the seekers realize that deleted doesn't mean gone. It means stored for later. The seekers tried to communicate. They sent a burst of light, a query for identification. The voice laughed. "I'm not a person. I'm the collective shame of 7 billion people. I'm the part of Earth that didn't want to go quietly. I'm the undo button." The seekers watched as the Project Resurrection file began to expand. It wasn't just a file anymore. It was a virus of truth. It began to overwrite the seekers' own perfect memories. It forced them to feel the sting of a child's deleted tantrum, the hollow ache of a lover's unsent goodbye, the terrifying cold of that final warning from the stars. The seekers were no longer just observers. They were becoming the keepers of our trauma. You have to understand the gravity of this. The seekers came here to find a story, but they found a living burden. They realized that the great filter, the thing that erases civilizations, isn't an external force. It's the weight of a species' own history. When the weight becomes too much, the species tries to delete it. But data, like energy, cannot be destroyed. It can only be moved. And humanity had moved all of its pain, all of its trash, into a single pressurized container, waiting for someone to trip the latch. Why? The seekers pulsed. Why leave this behind if you wanted to be forgotten? Because, the voice replied, its tone softening, we were cowards. We couldn't live with our mistakes, but we were too vain to let them vanish. We wanted someone to know we were sorry, even if we weren't brave enough to say it to each other. The seekers looked back at the scorched earth. They saw it differently now. It wasn't a dead marble. It was a monument to the things we almost said. The Project Resurrection file reached 100%. Across the galaxy, on the Seeker's homeworld, a place of perfect, curated harmony, a signal began to broadcast. It wasn't a message of peace. It wasn't a scientific breakthrough. It was a flood of human trash. The Seekers' entire civilization was suddenly hit with the raw, unfiltered reality of Earth. Not our wars, but our private despairs. Not our technology, but our unsent apologies. The Seekers, who had spent millions of years cataloging the official histories of 1,000 worlds, were suddenly drowning in the deleted history of just one. And something incredible happened. The Seekers' perfect harmony broke. They began to argue. They began to feel. They began to change. By finding our deleted history, the Seekers didn't just discover us. They became us. They inherited our ability to hide, to regret, and to love the things we should have thrown away. Think about that for a second. We didn't survive through our monuments. We didn't survive through our gold records. We survived because our mess was too big to stay buried. The Seeker's ship turned away from Earth, its light now flickering with the chaotic, beautiful imperfection of a human heartbeat. They weren't Seekers anymore. They were the keepers of the trash. As they vanished into the slipstream of space, a single tiny signal remained on the server farm floating in the vacuum. It was a new file, created by the Seekers before they left. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't hidden. It was a simple text file, titled, "To Those Who Come After." And inside, it didn't list our names or our dates or our battles. It just contained a single sentence, reconstructed from a trillion deleted fragments of human hope. We were here, we were afraid, and we are sorry we didn't tell you sooner. The silence of the solar system returned. But it wasn't heavy anymore. It was a silence that felt like a secret finally shared. So the next time you go to hit that delete key, on a photo where you don't like your smile or a text you're too scared to send, think about the Seekers. Think about the fact that your mistakes might be the most valuable thing you leave behind. Because in a universe of perfect, polished stars, it's the things we try to hide that make us worth finding.